Hey friend, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you how to EQ drums, bass, guitars, keys, and vocals. Today we're going to be looking at EQing all kinds of different tracks to fit together in an actual mixed situation. But before we dive in, if you're ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process in its entirety and really start to hone your workflow as an audio engineer, then I have just the thing for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's just a simple PDF that will walk you through the entire mixing process step by step to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without any more of the guesswork. It is a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and talk about EQing inside of a mix. What we're going to do here today is we're literally going to go through all of these instruments here, and I'm going to talk about the EQ on it and why we're making the moves we're making as we progress along. And I'm actually going to go in the order I would go if I was mixing this track from scratch. But before we jump into all of our EQ, let me play you the track here so you can hear what it's sounding like. Here's our finished mix for this song.
Somewhere out on that horizon, far away from the neon sky, I know there must be something better. I can't see another night in the city.
Alright, so that's where our track is sitting. So you can see we've got a full drum kit here. We've got a little bit of percussion, bass guitar, a few electric guitars, piano, organ, lead vocal, and then a stack of background vocals here. We're going to be looking mainly at this verse section here because it's where the bulk of our instruments are sitting, especially our lead vocal here. And we're going to start all the way to the left here with our kick drum. So I'm going to mute everything here. And we're going to add each of these instruments the way I would add them, in the order I would add them if I was mixing this track from scratch here. So we're going to mute out all of our pieces here. Ooh, not solo them. Starting just with our kick drum. So here is our soloed kick drum. So you can see by the processing here, I have 2 different EQs going on the kick drum. This is the way I like to work, and this is what I've found works best for me when I'm attacking a rock style kick drum. So here's our first EQ. The first move I'm making on kick drum, on really any instrument when I pull an EQ in, is the high pass filter here. So let me take off all our processing, and let me play you just the high pass filter here. So here's without our high pass. Ooh, excuse me, coffee's coming back to bite. And then I'll kick our high pass in. Just focusing that bottom end a little bit, tightening it up, rolling off some of that stuff we don't need down there that's making our kick drum feel a little bit too heavy. The next piece of the puzzle here on our kick drum EQ is I want to get rid of anything else we don't need before our compression. And for me, there's just a little bit of ringing going on here in the mid-range. So take a listen without this cut, and then I'll kick this notch in. Just cleans up our kick drum sound a little bit, gets rid of any kind of ringing we have going on. Now before I kick this top boost in, I'm going to throw my compressor in place here. I like to do any top end boosts on kick drum, on really anything, going into compression here. So we've got an 11 dB boost, an 11.5 dB boost at 9K, and this is going to give us all that top end air and all that top end click that we want on the kick drum here. You can hear now we have a ton of attack and a ton of click on the kick drum, and it's really going to cut through the rest of these instruments very, very well. Now, the final piece of the puzzle with our kick drum EQ is our bottom end, of course, and I like to do this at the end of the chain, post compression, post top end boost, post cutting. I like to get the bottom end in at the end after everything's evened out and after everything is dialed in to where I want it. So we're doing a 6 dB boost at 80 hertz. This is going to emphasize the fundamental here, and this is going to give us a ton of weight and bottom end on our kick drum. Now our kick drum feels big, it has some weight to it, and our kick drum overall has a ton of punch. Now, the next piece of the puzzle here is our snare drum. I'm kind of working the same way here on most of the drums, and most of my EQ philosophy stays the same no matter what instrument I'm working on. Any kind of top end boosts, I like to do pre-compression. I like to start by cutting what I don't need in the instrument, and then any kind of bottom end boosts, I like to do post-compression, usually at the end of the chain here. So on our snare drum, same kind of thing here. So the first thing I'm putting into place here is the high pass filter. So these two boosts here we'll put in a second, but we're going to start with the high pass filter, then I'll put in this notch here that's going to pull out a little bit of ringing, and then we'll throw everything else in. So I'm going to hit play here. You can hear our snare drum, and I'm going to run through this processing here for you, okay? So bottom end cut first, a little bit of ringing then our compressor, and then we'll get our top end boost in place. And our last piece of the puzzle will be our bottom end boost. Same way we worked on the kick drum here. So those are the moves. Let's talk about what we're doing with each one here. So obviously our first one here, the high pass filter, we're getting rid of any low end rumble, trying to roll off a little bit of the bottom end on the kick drum that's coming through so we can isolate our snare sound a little bit better. And then we're pulling out any kind of ringing that's going on. So we've got a big frequency here at 246 that was ringing out on our snare drum, didn't sound very good. We wanted to get that out. So our first pieces are controlling our snare drum before we do our boosts, before we do our compression. So after that, we're getting our compressor in. Then we're coming back and we're doing our top end boosts. Up here at 9K, that's giving us our air, that's giving us our crack on the snare drum. And then here in the mid range, that's giving us our attack emphasis on the snare drum. So it feels big and it feels full range. Then the final piece of the puzzle here, I keep saying piece of the puzzle. We're putting this puzzle together here, huh? The last thing we're doing here on our snare drum is adding some bottom end weight here. This makes it feel heavy and this makes it feel like it's hitting a little bit harder because it has some weight to it. So that's our kick and snare. The next thing we're going to add in here is our toms. Let's go to an actual spot here where we have some tom fills. We'll loop this section here and we will add in our toms. You can hear our toms first and then we'll talk about the processing here. A little bit of the lead vocal was left over there running. So, kind of 3 or 4 moves here on the kick drum, or on the toms, excuse me, sorry. First thing I'm always doing, like we've seen so far, is rolling in our high pass filter. I'm just pulling this up to about 70 hertz. The fundamental of our low tom is sitting right around 80 hertz here. So I'm just going right underneath that, and you can see I'm actually boosting at the same place I have my high pass filter set. So getting rid of what we don't need and then boosting right there at the fundamental to bring some of that bottom end back. That's our first move here. Next move I'm making is I'm getting rid of a ton of the low mids and the mid range. The low mids and the mid range don't sound very great on toms, especially when you're mixing them as a group. You want to get rid of any of that muddiness and any of that nosiness that's coming through on the toms. It's going to make them feel bigger and it's going to make room for the rest of the kit. Then we have our 2 boosts. So this little bit at 70 hertz, bringing up that low end fundamental. And then we've got about 5 dB at 5K, bringing up some stick attack on our toms. So take a listen here, and I'll add these moves one by one. All right, now we've got our toms dialed in. We're almost done with the drums here. Our overheads in our room are going to be pretty similar in terms of process. So looking at our overheads here, there's only 2 moves I usually make on overheads unless there's a problem with the cymbals. If the overheads are recorded nicely, if the kit's recorded nicely, you're not going to have any top end problems on your overheads. But if there's something wrong with the recording, if it's mic'd in the wrong way, if you're getting phase issues, you're going to have some top end issues on your overheads, and you'll have to deal with that with multiband compression or dynamic EQ or all those crazy sorts of things to get your top end to sit right on the overheads. But if you have a good overhead recording, usually it's just about pulling out a little bit of low mids and then rolling off the bottom end. Sometimes you can leave the bottom end in if you want more of a kit picture with your overheads. I like to leave it a little bit thinner on the overhead, so mainly the bottom end is coming from the kick and the snare drum, not coming through on our overhead. So here's our overhead sound, and I'll throw these 2 moves in for you. So the first move we're doing is the high pass filter, so rolling off a little bit of that kick drum and then just a touch of the fundamental on the snare drum, thinning out the overheads a little bit, making sure our weight's coming from our spot mics, and then pulling out a ton of low mids here so it's not feeling muddy and it doesn't get boxy sounding on our drum kit. You can hear it's really about balancing the kit in our overheads there. Before these 2 moves go in, you can hear our snare is pretty crazy sounding. We have a lot of bottom end that we don't need. We roll these 2 moves in and suddenly the kit balances a little bit better in our overheads and we have more emphasis on the top end, which is what we want to add to the rest of the kit here. All right, now we've got our mono room mic here. This is kind of an effects mic for me. This is literally just the vocal mic that's up in the booth, and I like to leave it on when we're recording drums. So I'm pulling out a ton of mid-range here. I don't want to hear any low mids or mid-range coming through on this mic. Mainly I want some heartbeat from the kick drum and then a little bit of high mids here for some crack on the snare drum. So take a listen. I'll give you the before and I'll put these moves in. So high pass filter to roll off a touch of the sub, low pass filter to control the cymbals. I don't want cymbal noise coming from this. And then a huge cut in the low mids to make sure this isn't muddy and it's not going to make our drums feel too heavy overall. And those are the main parts of our drum kit. The last piece here on the end for our drum kit is the room mic. This is just a reverb. It's a small room here, or a medium style room from the Bricasti emulations. And then I've just got an EQ on the end of it, rolling off a little bit of the bottom end and a little bit of the top end. So here is our drum sound. I'll throw the percussion in there as well as a little bonus. All right, moving down to our bass here. The first thing I'm doing on the bass guitar is I am isolating the bottom end and the top end. So on the DI track, I'm just using the bottom end here, so it keeps things clean and makes sure our low end is just coming from one signal on the bass guitar here. It's everything below 180 hertz, 12 dB per octave slope. And then I'm using our amp track as the top end or any kind of grit and bite we need on the bass. And this is the opposite. It's everything above 180 hertz, 24 dB per octave slope there. Let me solo our bass guitar. You can hear what it sounds like by itself. Now our chain's looking pretty similar to everything we've looked at so far, especially our kick and our snare here. We have an EQ, then our compression, and another EQ. We're gonna follow the same philosophy here on our bass guitar that we did beforehand. So on our first EQ here, getting rid of what we don't need in the bottom end and tightening up around our fundamental. Our fundamental's sitting around 80 hertz here on our bass guitar, so we're rolling up just underneath that there, 70 hertz. I'm doing 2 boosts here, but into our compression, just like we worked on the kick drum here, just like we worked on the snare drum. A little bit of bite here in the mid-range. This is going to give us some growl on the bass guitar, make sure it sits nicely with our guitars. And then our top end boost here at 3K, this is giving us that fret noise and that string noise so we can hear and discern the notes the bass player is playing, even if we don't have subs or if we're listening on something that doesn't have a lot of bottom end. Then post-compression here, here's our bottom end work, okay? Bringing up that fundamental, about 5 dB boost at 80 hertz here, almost 6 dB boost, excuse me. And then pulling out just a touch of 200 so things aren't feeling too heavy or too muddy there in the low mids. So let's add these in one by one here, starting with our high pass filter. You can hear by boosting post-compression, we have an even bottom end that's going to sit right where we park it inside this track, and it's going to sit really, really nicely with our kick drum. So let's throw our bass guitar in with our drums. All right, low end is feeling really, really good. The next thing I'm going to throw in here is the piano, and I'm going to throw both of these in together because the second one is just some fills, but the same processing is going on the piano here as the piano fills track. So let me throw it into the track here, and you can hear it. I'll also solo it up so you can hear it by itself. We'll actually start with it soloed, and then I'll throw it in the track. You can hear what our piano is sounding like. Only 3 moves going on here on our piano track, okay? We've got a high pass filter, a little dip in the low mids, and then we've got our top end boost. And this is working the same way we've been going. So pre-compression here, getting rid of what we don't need, and then adding that brightness on the top end after we get our compressor set. So let me hit play here. We're going to roll off some bottom end first. I don't want the bottom end of the piano conflicting with the bass guitar. A piano can reach really, really far down, and it can interfere with the frequency range our bass is sitting in, so the fundamental or bass guitar. I'm going to roll all of that off here, and pretty much actually to double where the fundamental on our bass is. So our bass is sitting around our bass is sitting around 80 hertz here, so I'm rolling our high pass up to actually about 160 hertz. So rolling about an octave up from the fundamental on our bass guitar. That's going to help us control our bottom end, keep it tight, pulling out just a little bit here in the low mids to make sure the piano isn't too heavy because we've still got to add guitars and organ in here, and then of course background vocals. Then our brightness is going to come post-compression. So once we get our compressor set, then we're going to add some brightness to make sure this is going to cut through and it's going to feel shiny inside of our track here. So I'm going to hit play. We'll put these moves in one by one. All right, the next thing we're gonna add in here is our electric guitars. These are getting kind of the same processing here. You can see an EQ and a little bit of compression on each of them here. I'm mixing the pair of rhythm guitars as a group here. So let me hit play. I'll solo them up first. You can hear them by themselves. We'll throw them back in with everything, and we'll talk about our couple moves here on our electric guitars. All right, first things first here on our pair of electrics, I want to get rid of what we don't need. So before our compression goes in here, let me take off what we've got. The first thing I'm doing usually on a pair of electric guitars or electric guitars in general is I'm closing down the frequency range a little bit. especially distorted electric guitars, but clean electric guitars too. You don't want to hear a lot of super highs. So 7, 8, 9, 10K, that can get a little bit pokey for the listener and it can make your guitars feel harsh. So I want to get rid of that. That's our cut here with our low pass filter. And then bringing in our high pass filter, same philosophy we used on the piano, right? We don't want the bottom end of the guitar, the low strings on the guitar, to interfere with our fundamental on our bass guitar or on our kick drum. So tightening up our bottom end with a high pass filter, tightening up our top end with a low pass filter, then our compression, and then just a touch of brightness was needed on these electric guitars. So usually I'm not going above about 5K here. So I'm right at the top end of where I want to boost on a pair of electrics, doing about a 2 dB boost at 5K here, and it gives us just enough brightness for these guitars to sit where they need to inside this track. So take a listen, I'll hit play, and we'll add these moves in one by one. I threw in our organ there. That's the last piece from all of our instruments here, is just the organ track. All this is I'm rolling off as much of the bottom end as I can because I don't want to add any kind of heaviness with the organ here. I just want to emphasize that really organ sounding frequency, which is that 3K area here. You can see I'm doing about a 5 dB boost at 3K. That's going to give us that nice bright B3 organ sound, and we're rolling off as much of the bottom end as we can. All right, now we've got our stack of background vocals here. There's no processing going on any of the individual tracks here. I'm doing everything on the bus. So once we get our balance set on the background vocals, the processing is coming in here on the bus. So I'm starting with an EQ up top here, and then we have a little bit on the end, just doing a little trimming after our compression, after our de-essing here. So let's take all our processing off, and we'll put these in one by one as we go through them. So first thing I'm doing is I'm rolling off as much of the bottom end as possible. I don't want these to be heavy, especially since they're panned wide. I don't want them to come in really huge and overtake the track here. So that's what our high pass filter is doing, pulling out a ton of mid-range here. Because they're spread wide, I want them to be more airy and top end forward than mid-range forward. Our mid-range needs to come from our instruments and our lead vocal. So we're making room for that by dipping out about 7 dB at 500 hertz. Then we've got our two top end boosts here. The mid-range one, so 2.26K, this 3 dB here, this is making sure we have some energy in the mid-range there so they don't feel really scooped sounding since we're taking out a bunch of this 500 hertz area. And then our top end boost, that's giving us our nice light airy sound on our background vocals. And then I did have this one at the end here that's just pulling out a touch more in the low mids to make sure they aren't too heavy sounding. So one by one, we'll put these in here.
In the city. In the city.
So you can hear all of that heaviness, all of that muddiness, all that buildup is gone on our background vocals, and we have a ton of air and brightness to push these up in the track. So let's throw them in with everything else and see where we're standing. Last piece of the puzzle here, one more time, last piece of the puzzle, right, is our lead vocal. So we'll get to that in just a second. Here's where we are so far. All right, let's look at our last element here, which is our lead vocal. We're going to jump back to the verse to take a look at our lead vocal. That is where it's more prominent here. Only a couple moves EQ-wise going in here on our lead vocal. We've got 2 here on the front EQ and then 1 on the back end EQ. And you can see we're working the same way we talked about our philosophy, getting rid of what we don't need, then getting our compressor in, boosting top end into our compressor, and then post compression, bringing up that bottom end weight here. So the first move I'm always making on anything here you've seen so far is the high pass filter. I want to control the bottom end. That's what's getting you a pro sounding mix, is having a dialed in and tight sounding bottom end. So rolling off everything we don't need here. So it's getting rid of any air conditioning noise, which you could probably hear in the vent right above me here. It's getting rid of any excessive breaths, any of the sibilance range that pops out there in the bottom end, rolling all that off, getting our vocal focused on where the heart of the sound is sitting. Then our compression, de-essing goes in, and then we're adding that air and that top end brightness to our vocal. That's going to make sure he cuts through in this track here and sits where he should. And then at the end of the chain here, bringing up our bottom end to give him some weight and to give him some fullness inside this track here. So starting at the beginning here, let's get everything in.
Somewhere out on that horizon, far away from the neon sky, I know there must be something better. I can't see another. Somewhere out on that horizon, far away from the neon sky, I know there must be something better.
You can hear our volume isn't changing too much here on our lead vocal. It's just different frequency emphasis. And then once we get things evened out with our compressor, pulling up that brightness lets him cut through, and then pulling up that weight in the bottom end, make sure he feels big when he's sitting in the center of this track here. So let's take a listen all the way kind of in through this chorus section here. We'll start at the verse. Excuse me. Coffee's really coming back to bite here. We'll start at the top of this verse section and we'll play it into the chorus. You can hear the background vocals and everything going in together here. We've got everything EQ'd. Let's listen to our full track.
Somewhere out on that horizon, far away from the neon sky, I know there must be something better. I can't see another day in the city.
And that is our EQ for drums, bass, guitars, keys, and vocals. Remember, our philosophy is we're going in, getting rid of what we don't need, then we get our compressor set, we're boosting any kind of top end into our compression, and then post compression is where we'll bring up any of the weight we need on any of these instruments. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process in its entirety and really dial in your mixing workflow, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.